The apple fell from her hand and rolled through the dust, bruised and small, and Annabelle Dixon watched it settle against a rock while the dying tree groaned behind her in the autumn wind of 1883. She was 22 years old and standing in what remained of her father's farm outside Rock Springs, Wyoming, a place where hope had dried up faster than the creek that used to run through the property. The tree had been dying for 3 years now, ever since the drought began, but she came here every September anyway, searching its brittle branches for whatever fruit it could still produce, because the memory of her mother planting this tree 15 years ago was all she had left of better days. The farm was quiet except for the wind and the occasional creak of the old barn that listed to one side like a drunk after a long night. Her father had died that spring, his heart giving out while he tried to fix the well that had gone dry 2 summers before. Now it was just Annabelle and the land was losing its fight against the elements. She bent to pick up the fallen apple, examining its wrinkled skin, wondering if she could salvage enough fruit to make even a single pie this year. The basket at her feet held maybe a dozen apples, and half of those were more suitable for the compost heap in the kitchen. She heard the horse before she saw the rider, the steady clip of hooves on the hard-packed road that ran past the property. Annabelle straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. A man on a bay gelding was approaching, leading a pack mule behind him. He wore the typical clothing of a ranch hand, worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. As he drew closer, he slowed his horse, then stopped entirely when he reached the fence line. "Afternoon," he called out, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and carried easily across the distance between them. Annabelle hesitated, then walked toward the fence, basket in hand. "Afternoon," she replied, cautious but not unfriendly. Out here, visitors were rare enough to be noteworthy, but common sense dictated wariness with strangers. The man dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a striking shade of hazel. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "Name is Flynn Lawrence," he said, walking up to the fence but respectfully staying on his side of it. "I am looking for work in these parts. Heard in town there might be ranches hiring on for the winter." "You heard wrong," Annabelle said, but not unkindly. "Most spreads around here are letting men go, not hiring. The drought has hit everyone hard." Flynn nodded, glancing around the property. His gaze lingered on the dying apple tree, then moved to the sagging barn, the house with its missing shingles, and finally back to Annabelle. "That your farm?" "It is now," she said. "My father passed in the spring. I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple but sincere, and Annabelle found herself believing him. "That tree looks like it has seen better days. Everything here has seen better days." She looked down at the apples in her basket. "This tree was the first thing my mother planted when they settled this land. I keep hoping it will come back, but I think it's too far gone." Flynn stepped closer to the fence, studying the tree with what appeared to be genuine interest. "May I take a look?" Annabelle considered this. Every instinct told her to be careful around strangers, especially being a woman alone on an isolated farm. But something about Flynn Lawrence seemed honest. Maybe it was the way he had stayed on his side of the fence, or the genuine sympathy in his voice when he offered his condolences. Maybe it was just that she was lonely and tired of making every decision by herself. "I suppose it would not hurt," she said finally, walking over to unlatch the gate. Flynn led his horse and mule through, latching the gate carefully behind him. He walked directly to the apple tree, running his hand along the trunk, examining the branches, even kneeling down to look at the roots. Annabelle watched him, puzzled by his thoroughness. "You know something about apple trees?" she asked. "I grew up on an orchard," Flynn said, still examining the tree. "In Missouri before the war. Well, I was just a boy during the war, but I remember my father's orchard. He taught me everything about apple trees before he died." He stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. "This tree is not dead yet, but it is close. The main problem is water, of course, but there is also disease in some of these branches. If you pruned away the dead wood and could get water to the roots regularly, it might recover. Might take a year or two, though." "I do not have a year or two worth of water," Annabelle said quietly. "The well is dry, and the creek has been nothing but dust since last summer." Flynn looked around again, his eyes scanning the landscape with what seemed like a practiced eye. "There is water here somewhere. Land like this always has water, you just have to know where to look for it. My father looked everywhere. Your father was a farmer, not a well digger." Flynn smiled, and Annabelle noticed that his whole face transformed when he smiled. "I've helped dig a dozen wells across 3 territories. I could find water here if you wanted me to try." Annabelle felt a flutter of something that might have been hope, but she tamped it down immediately. Hope was dangerous when you had nothing to back it up with. "I cannot pay you," she said bluntly. "I have barely enough to get through the winter myself." "I was not asking for pay," Flynn said. "I was asking for work and a place to sleep. You have got a barn, even if it is listing a bit. I could stay there, take my meals with you if you are willing to share, and in exchange I will find you water and fix what needs fixing around here." "That is not a fair trade. You would be doing all the work. You would be feeding me and giving me shelter. That is worth plenty." Flynn met her eyes steadily. "Truth is, Miss Dixon, I am tired of drifting. I have been riding from one ranch to another for 3 years now, ever since I left Missouri. I am looking for a place to put down roots, and if I can help you save your farm in the process, that seems like a fair trade to me." Annabelle wanted to say yes immediately, but caution held her back. "I do not know you. For all I know, you could rob me blind in the night." "That is fair," Flynn acknowledged. "How about this? Let me stay for 1 week. I will sleep in the barn, work on finding water, and if at the end of the week you want me gone, I will go with no argument. But if I find water, or if you decide I am trustworthy, then maybe we can talk about a longer arrangement." It was a reasonable offer, perhaps too reasonable. But as Annabelle looked at Flynn Lawrence, with his honest hazel eyes and his easy smile, she found herself wanting to trust him. And more than that, she found herself wanting to not be alone anymore. "1 week," she said finally. "But you should know, I sleep with my father's rifle next to my bed." Flynn grinned. "I would expect nothing less, Miss Dixon. Call me Annabelle," she said, surprising herself. "If you are going to be staying here, even for a week, we might as well not stand on formality." "Annabelle," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. "Then you should call me Flynn." He extended his hand across the fence, and after a moment she took it. His handshake was firm and warm, his palm calloused from hard work. When their hands touched, Annabelle felt a spark of something she could not quite name, something that made her heart beat a little faster. She pulled her hand back quickly, suddenly flustered. "The barn is this way," she said, turning to lead him toward the sagging structure. "It is not much, but it is dry, mostly dry anyway. The roof leaks in the back corner when it rains, but we have not had rain in so long that is hardly a concern." Flynn followed her, leading his animals. "I can patch the roof while I am here, and shore up those support beams that are leaning. This barn has good bones, it just needs some attention." Inside the barn, it was cooler and dim, smelling of old hay and dust. There were 2 empty stalls where horses had once been kept, before Annabelle had to sell them to buy supplies. Flynn settled his horse and mule into the stalls, removing their tack with practiced efficiency. "There is hay in the loft," Annabelle said, pointing up. "Not much, but enough for your animals." "I brought grain," Flynn said, pulling bags from his pack. "I will use that first, save your hay." He moved around the barn with a confidence that came from years of similar accommodations, setting up a bedroll in the corner that did not leak, arranging his few possessions with military precision. Annabelle watched him, still not quite believing she had agreed to let a stranger stay on her property. "I should go start supper," she said finally. "Do you eat chicken? I have 3 hens left and they are still laying, so I can make eggs and biscuits." "That sounds fine," Flynn said. "Give me an hour to get settled and tend to my animals, and I will come up to the house." Annabelle nodded and left the barn, walking across the dusty yard to the farmhouse. It was a small structure, just 4 rooms, a kitchen and sitting area downstairs, 2 bedrooms upstairs. She had been sleeping in her old bedroom since her father died, unable to bring herself to move into the larger room her parents had shared. The house felt too big and too empty for just one person, every creak and groan amplified by the silence. In the kitchen, she stoked the fire in the stove and began preparing supper. As she worked, measuring out flour for biscuits, gathering eggs from the basket on the counter, she found her mind drifting back to Flynn Lawrence. What had made him offer to stay and work for just food and shelter? It seemed too generous, too good to be true. But when she thought about the way he had examined the apple tree, the knowledge in his hands and eyes, she wanted to believe he was genuine. She was pulling the biscuits from the oven when she heard his boots on the porch. He knocked politely, though she had left the door open to let in the evening air. "Come in," she called, and he entered, removing his hat. He had washed up at the pump, she noticed. His hair was damp and his face clean, and he had changed into a fresh shirt. The consideration of these small courtesies touched her more than it probably should have. "Smells wonderful," he said, looking at the table where she had set out 2 plates. "It is nothing fancy," Annabelle said, suddenly self-conscious, "but it is hot and there is plenty of it." They sat down to eat, and for a few minutes there was only the sound of utensils on plates. Then Flynn said, "You mentioned your mother planted that apple tree. Is she passed as well?" Annabelle nodded, swallowing a bite of biscuit. 5 years ago. She got sick one winter and never recovered. After she died, my father just sort of gave up. He kept working the farm, but his heart was not in it anymore." "That is hard," Flynn said quietly. "Losing someone you love can take the life out of you. Were you close with your parents?" "With my father, yes. My mother died when I was born, so I never knew her. It was just me and my father and the orchard for 16 years. Then the war came through, and though I was too young to fight, I was not too young to see what it did to the land and the people. My father died in '65, right at the end of it all, broke his back falling from a ladder while trying to save what was left of the trees." "I am sorry," Annabelle said, and meant it. They had both lost so much. "That is why I know about trees," Flynn continued. "My father made sure I learned everything. He used to say that an orchard was a legacy, something you planted for the future, not just for yourself. He would spend hours telling me about the different varieties of apples, the best way to graft branches, how to read the soil and the weather." He smiled sadly. "After he died, I tried to keep the orchard going, but the war had ruined the land. Nothing would grow anymore, so I headed west, looking for places where things could still grow. And you have been drifting ever since, more or less. I have worked on cattle ranches, helped build fences, dug wells, even spent a season as a deputy in a town in Colorado. But nothing ever felt right, you know. Nothing ever felt like home. Annabelle understood that feeling more than she could say. This farm had been her home her entire life, but since her parents died, it had felt like a shell of what it once was. The walls and the land were the same, but the heart of it was gone. "What made you stop here?" she asked. "Rock Springs is not much of a town, and there are not many opportunities around here." Flynn was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "Honestly, I saw you standing under that dying tree, trying to pick apples from branches that could barely hold them, and something about it just struck me. Maybe it reminded me of my father's orchard, or maybe it was just that you looked so determined, refusing to give up even though anyone could see that tree was on its last legs. I thought, if she is that stubborn about a dying tree, maybe she would be stubborn enough to fight for the rest of this farm too." Annabelle felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I do not know if stubborn is the word I would use." "I would," Flynn said, but he was smiling. "And I mean it as a compliment. Stubborn is what you need out here. Stubborn is what keeps people alive when everything else says to quit." After supper, Flynn insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Annabelle's protests. They worked side by side at the basin, her washing and him drying, and the simple domesticity of it made Annabelle's chest ache with loneliness. She had not realized how much she missed having someone to share the small tasks of daily life with. When the kitchen was clean, Flynn put his hat back on and headed for the door. "I will start looking for water tomorrow," he said. "I noticed some cottonwood trees down by where you said the creek used to run. Cottonwoods always mean water, even if it is underground." "That seems like a good place to start." "Thank you," Annabelle said, "for all of this, for staying, for offering to help." "Thank me when I actually find water," Flynn said. But he smiled at her, that warm smile that transformed his face, and Annabelle found herself smiling back. She watched from the porch as he walked back to the barn, his figure gradually disappearing into the gathering darkness. Then she went inside, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to her bedroom. She did indeed keep her father's rifle next to her bed, but somehow she felt less afraid tonight than she had in months. The next morning, Annabelle woke to the sound of someone moving around outside. For a moment, still fuzzy with sleep, she panicked, reaching for the rifle before she remembered. Flynn. He was already up and working. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, starting coffee and beginning breakfast. By the time Flynn knocked on the door, she had eggs and bacon ready, along with fresh biscuits. "You are up early," she said, letting him in. "Old habit," Flynn replied. "On a ranch, you learn to make use of every hour of daylight." They ate breakfast together, falling into an easy conversation about the day's plans. Flynn wanted to survey the property more thoroughly, looking for signs of underground water. Annabelle had her usual chores, tending the chickens, working in the small vegetable garden that she kept alive through sheer force of will and carefully hoarded water, mending clothes. "Can I see your property lines?" Flynn asked. "Just so I know how much land we are working with." Annabelle fetched the deed and the old survey map her father had kept, spreading them on the table. Flynn studied them carefully, tracing the boundaries with his finger. 40 acres, he said. "That is a good size for a farm, especially if we can get water flowing again." "Your father chose well when he settled here." "He always said this land had potential," Annabelle said softly. "He used to talk about planting a whole orchard like the ones back east. My mother's apple tree was supposed to be just the first." Flynn looked up from the map, his hazel eyes bright with interest. "An orchard? Here?" He said the soil was right for it and the elevation. It was his dream after the homestead was established, but then the drought came and the dream died with the water. "Dreams do not have to die," Flynn said quietly. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them again. Over the following days, Flynn worked from sunrise to sunset, exploring every inch of the property. He walked the land with a divining rod he fashioned from a forked willow branch, an old technique his father had taught him. Annabelle had been skeptical at first, but she watched as he patiently crisscrossed the property, paying attention to the vegetation, the soil, the subtle changes in elevation. On the third day, he found what he was looking for. He came back to the house at midday, his face flushed with excitement. "I found it," he said. "Water, I am sure of it." Annabelle dropped the mending she had been working on. "Where?" "About 200 yards south of the barn, where the land dips down slightly. There is a whole line of those cottonwoods, and the earth feels different there, more alive." The divining rod practically pulled itself toward the ground. "How far down do you think it is?" "Maybe 30 feet. Hard to say for sure until we start digging, but I do not think it is too deep." 30 feet is a lot of digging," Annabelle said, trying not to let her hope rise too high. "It is," Flynn agreed, "but I have dug deeper. With the right tools and enough time, I can get to it." He paused, then added, "I know I said 1 week, but a job like this, it is going to take longer. Maybe 3 or 4 weeks if I work at it steady. Are you willing to let me stay that long?" Annabelle looked at him. This man who had appeared in her life less than a week ago and was already offering to dig a well for her. She had been watching him carefully over the past few days, looking for signs of dishonesty or ulterior motives, but all she had seen was hard work and genuine kindness. He had fixed the barn roof, shored up the leaning wall, even repaired the chicken coop fence where the wire had come loose. Every evening he came to the house for supper, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. His travels, her childhood, their dreams for the future. She was starting to look forward to those evenings more than she wanted to admit. "Yes," she said, "you can stay as long as it takes." Flynn smiled, that warm, transformative smile, and Annabelle felt her heart skip. "Then I will need to go into town and get some supplies. Proper digging tools, timber for shoring up the well walls, rope and pulleys. Do you have any money you can spare?" Annabelle hesitated. She had some coins saved, hidden in a jar in her bedroom, but it was meant to buy supplies for the winter. Still, what good were winter supplies if they had no water? "I have some," she said. "How much do you need?" $40 should cover it, maybe 50 to be safe. It was most of what she had, but Annabelle went upstairs and retrieved the jar. She counted out $50, the coins heavy in her hand, and brought them down to Flynn. "This is a lot of money," he said, looking at the coins seriously. "Are you sure you trust me with this?" "No," Annabelle said honestly, "but I trust that you know what you are doing, and I trust that you want to help. That has to be enough." Flynn closed his hand around the coins. "I will bring you a receipt for every penny spent, and I will bring back water, I promise you that." He left for town that afternoon, and Annabelle spent the rest of the day trying not to worry. What if he just kept riding? What if she had just handed her winter survival money over to a charming drifter with a nice smile? But even as the doubts circled in her mind, her heart insisted that Flynn would come back. And he did, just before sunset, his mule loaded down with supplies. Annabelle heard the animals and came running out of the house, relief flooding through her so strongly it made her knees weak. Flynn looked up and saw her, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. He had come back. She had trusted him, and he had proven worthy of that trust. "Got everything I need," he said, dismounting. The hardware store owner in Rock Springs was happy for the business. He said things have been slow with the drought. "Did you get supper in town?" Annabelle asked. "No, I rode straight back. Figured you might be wondering." "I have stew on the stove," she said. "Come up to the house when you are ready." That night, Over bowls of venison stew and the last of the previous day's bread, Flynn showed her the receipts, carefully recorded by the store owner. Every penny accounted for, exactly as he had promised. "I bought extra rope," he explained. "It is an expense now, but it is going to be necessary for getting the water up once we hit the source. And the timber is treated so it will not rot in the ground. This well, if I do it right, it should last decades." "I cannot believe you are doing all this," Annabelle said softly. Flynn met her eyes across the table. "I told you I am looking for a place to belong. Maybe this is it." The next morning, Flynn began digging. It was brutal work, even in the cooler autumn weather. Annabelle insisted on helping, at least with hauling away the dirt he excavated, and together they fell into a rhythm. Flynn would dig down, filling buckets with earth and rock, and Annabelle would haul them away, dumping them in a growing pile. As the days passed, the well grew deeper. 10 feet, 15, 20. Flynn had to rig a pulley system to get the buckets up and down efficiently. Annabelle watched him work, marveling at his strength and determination. His shirt would be soaked with sweat by midday, his hands blistered despite his worn gloves, but he never complained. They talked while they worked, their conversations ranging across every topic imaginable. Flynn told her about the places he had seen, the people he had met. She told him about growing up on the farm, the happy years before the drought when her parents were both alive and the land was green. They discovered shared loves. Both enjoyed reading, though books were scarce. Both loved the night sky, the endless spread of stars that seemed so much brighter out here than in populated places. Both wanted something more than mere survival. They wanted a life worth living. On the 18th day of digging, Flynn hit water. Annabelle was in the house, preparing lunch, when she heard him shout. She dropped the knife she had been using to slice bread and ran outside. Flynn was climbing up the rope from the well shaft, his clothes soaked, his face split by the biggest grin she had ever seen. "Water," he said, reaching the top. "Cold, clear water. We did it, Annabelle." Without thinking, Annabelle threw her arms around him. He was wet and dirty and smelled of earth and sweat, but she did not care. He had found water. He had saved her farm. Flynn hugged her back, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, they were standing very close, her hands still on his shoulders, his on her waist. Annabelle looked up into his hazel eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. Then Flynn stepped back, clearing his throat. I should finish installing the pump mechanism," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Get the water flowing properly." "Yes," Annabelle said, flustered. "Yes, of course, I will go finish lunch." She fled to the house, her heart pounding. What had just happened? That moment of closeness, the way he had looked at her, the way she had felt in his arms, it was more than gratitude, more than friendship. It was something she had not felt since before her parents died, something she had thought the drought had dried up along with the creek. Desire. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Over the next few days, Flynn finished installing the pump, a hand-operated mechanism that would draw water up from the well with relative ease. The first time Annabelle worked the handle and water gushed out into the bucket, clear and cold and perfect, she cried. Flynn stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, saying nothing but offering silent support. "We should water the apple tree first," Annabelle said, wiping her eyes. "If it is not too late." They carried buckets of water to the dying tree, soaking the ground around its roots. The earth was so dry it seemed to drink the water desperately, absorbing every drop. They watered it 3 times that day, and then every day after that. Annabelle knew it might be too late, that the tree might be too far gone to save, but she had to try. With the well complete, Flynn began working on other repairs around the farm. He fixed the sagging porch, replaced broken windows, patched holes in the roof of the house. Annabelle watched her farm slowly transform from a dying piece of land into something that resembled a homestead again. But more than the physical changes, she felt something shifting inside herself. She was falling in love with Flynn Lawrence. It had happened slowly, so gradually she had not noticed until it was already too late to stop it. It was in the way he showed up every morning with a smile, ready to work. In the careful way he handled her father's tools, with respect for the man who had owned them. In the evenings they spent on the porch after supper, talking until the stars came out. In 1,000 small kindnesses and considerations that showed he cared not just about the farm, but about her. But Annabelle did not know how Flynn felt. He was unfailingly polite, respectful of her space and her person. Since that day they had hugged at the well, he had been careful not to touch her unnecessarily. Was he just being courteous, or was he keeping his distance for another reason? Did he see her as merely an employer, someone he was helping in exchange for room and board? Or did he feel the same pull she did, the same magnetic draw that made her heart race when he was near? She was too afraid to ask, too afraid of ruining what they had built together over these weeks. October turned into November, and the weather began to change. The fierce heat of summer and the warm days of autumn gave way to cooler temperatures and the occasional frost. Flynn began talking about winter preparations, things that would need to be done before the snow came. "We should think about laying in firewood," he said one evening over supper, "and checking the insulation in the house. You are going to need to keep those chickens warm too, or they will stop laying." Annabelle noticed his use of we and you in the same sentence, as if he was uncertain of his place here. "Are you planning to stay through the winter?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Flynn looked up from his plate, his hazel eyes unreadable. "Do you want me to?" It was the opening she had been both hoping for and dreading. Annabelle set down her fork, gathering her courage. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." "Then I will stay," Flynn said, "for as long as you will have me." "How long is that?" The question came out before Annabelle could stop it, more vulnerable than she had intended. Flynn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Annabelle, I need to be honest with you about something. These past 2 months, being here, working on this farm, spending time with you, it has been the happiest I have been since my father died. I wake up every morning and I look forward to the day, not because of the work, but because I know I will see you. When I found that water, my first thought was not about the well or the farm. It was that I had done something to make you happy, and that mattered more to me than anything else." Annabelle's heart was beating so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Flynn, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I am just a drifter, a man with nothing to his name but a horse and a mule and some tools. You have land, a home, a future here. I have no right to ask you for anything. But if you were willing, if you thought you could see me as more than just a hired hand, I would like to stay here not just through the winter but through every season after that. I would like to help you build that orchard your father dreamed of. I would like to make this place thrive again." He paused, then added, so softly she almost did not hear it, "I would like to be the man who gets to love you if you will have me." Annabelle felt tears prickling her eyes. "You think I only see you as a hired hand. I do not know what you see." She stood up from the table and walked around to where he sat. Flynn turned in his chair to face her, looking up with an expression that was equal parts hope and fear. Annabelle reached out and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the roughness of his late-day stubble against her palms. "I see a man who stopped to help a stranger when he had no reason to," she said. "I see someone who worked himself to exhaustion to dig a well for a farm that is not even his. I see kindness and strength and integrity. I see someone I trust completely, even though I barely know him. And I see someone I have fallen in love with, despite all my efforts not to. Flynn's eyes widened. You love me. I do, Annabelle said, and felt a weight lift from her chest with the admission. I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait longer, be more sensible about this, but I cannot help how I feel. I love you, Flynn Lawrence. Flynn stood up, and then his arms were around her, pulling her close. I love you too, he said into her hair. God, Annabelle, I have loved you since that first day, watching you refuse to give up on that dying tree. You are the strongest, most stubborn, most beautiful woman I have ever met. Annabelle tilted her face up, and Flynn lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. Then it deepened, becoming more urgent, weeks of restrained longing finally finding release. Annabelle's hands moved to his shoulders, pulling him closer, and Flynn's arms tightened around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I know I should court you properly, wait a respectable amount of time, but life is too short and too uncertain. I want to build a future with you, Annabelle. I want to plant that orchard and grow old watching it bear fruit. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Marry me. Yes, Annabelle said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later, in the small church in Rock Springs. It was a simple ceremony with few guests. The preacher, his wife, the store owner who had sold Flynn the well supplies and his family, and a few neighbors who had known Annabelle's parents. Annabelle wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk upstairs, and Flynn wore a new suit he bought specially for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Flynn kissed her with such joy and tenderness that Annabelle felt like her heart might burst. This man, this wonderful man who had wandered into her life when she needed him most, was now her husband. They spent their wedding night in the farmhouse, in the big bedroom that had been her parents'. Annabelle had aired it out and changed the linens, putting fresh flowers from her struggling garden on the dresser. Flynn carried her over the threshold of the bedroom, and they made love with the gentle reverence of two people who had waited for this moment and wanted to savor every second of it. Afterward, lying in Flynn's arms in the darkness, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear, Annabelle felt a peace she had not known in years. She was no longer alone. She had a partner, a husband, someone to share both the burdens and the joys of life. I want to start planting the orchard in the spring, Flynn said softly, his hand stroking her hair. If that is all right with you. It is more than all right, Annabelle said. It is perfect. Winter came to Wyoming with its usual ferocity, but inside the farmhouse, Annabelle and Flynn were warm and happy. Flynn had indeed laid in plenty of firewood, and they spent the long evenings planning the orchard. Flynn knew varieties of apples Annabelle had never heard of: Arkansas Black, Winter Banana, Wolf River, Grimes Golden. He drew diagrams showing how to space the trees, how to arrange them for the best sun exposure and wind protection. We will start small, he said, spreading his drawings on the kitchen table. Maybe 20 trees the first year. We can order saplings from a nursery in Denver, have them shipped here in early spring. Then we will plant them where I found the best soil, install an irrigation system from the well, and nurture them carefully for the first few years. How long before they bear fruit? Annabelle asked. 3 to 5 years for a decent crop, longer for them to reach full production. But that is all right, we are young, we have time. Annabelle looked at her husband, his face animated as he talked about the orchard, and felt a surge of love so strong it almost hurt. You really think we can do this? Turn this struggling farm into an orchard. I know we can, Flynn said firmly. We already have the water and we have each other. The rest is just time and work, and we have plenty of both. The apple tree they had saved showed signs of recovery by the end of winter. In February, when Flynn checked it, he found tiny green buds forming on some of the branches he had pruned. "Look at this," he said, bringing Annabelle out to see. "Your mother's tree is coming back." Annabelle touched the buds gently, afraid they might disappear if she pressed too hard. "I cannot believe it." "Believe it," Flynn said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "This tree survived because you refused to let it die. That is the power of stubborn love, Annabelle." In March, as the snow began to melt and the days grew longer, they received a telegram from the Denver nursery. The apple saplings were ready for shipment. Flynn rode into Rock Springs to arrange for their delivery. And 2 weeks later, a wagon arrived carrying 20 small trees, their roots carefully wrapped in burlap. They planted the orchard together over the course of a week, Flynn digging the holes to exact specifications, Annabelle helping to position each sapling and fill in the earth around it. They planted in rows, with space between each tree for growth, creating neat lines that marched down the gentle slope south of the barn. When the last tree was planted, they stood together surveying their work. 20 small trees, barely more than sticks with roots at this point, but full of potential. "It does not look like much now," Flynn said, echoing Annabelle's thoughts. "But it will," she said, taking his hand. "Give it time." That spring, Annabelle discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, and when the doctor in Rock Springs confirmed it, she rode home in a daze of joy and terror. She was going to be a mother. She and Flynn were going to have a child. Flynn was in the orchard when she got home, checking the irrigation lines he had installed. Annabelle walked down to meet him, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "Flynn," she called, and something in her voice made him look up immediately. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, and started to cry. "Better than fine. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Flynn dropped the tool he was holding and closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He swept her up in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby? Are you sure?" The doctor confirmed it. "He thinks it will be born in November." "November," Flynn repeated wonderingly. "By harvest time next year we will have a child." He set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass, and placed his hand gently on her stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I am your father and I cannot wait to meet you." Annabelle covered his hand with hers, and they stood like that in the middle of the orchard they had planted together, imagining the future. The pregnancy was not easy. Annabelle suffered terrible sickness in the early months, barely able to keep anything down. Flynn hovered over her anxiously, trying to tempt her with different foods, making sure she rested. As her stomach grew, he took over more and more of the farm work, insisting that she not strain herself. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Annabelle protested, but she was secretly grateful for his care. "You are carrying our child," Flynn said firmly. "That is the most important job on this farm." In late October, the apple tree that Annabelle's mother had planted so many years ago produced fruit for the first time in 4 years. The apples were small and there were not many of them, but they were perfect, crisp and sweet. Annabelle cried when Flynn brought her the first one, cut into slices. "Your mother's tree survived," he said. "Just like you, just like our farm." Their son was born on November 15, 1884, after a long and difficult labor. Flynn paced outside the bedroom while the doctor and his wife attended to Annabelle, praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, he felt his knees go weak with relief. The doctor's wife opened the door. "You can come in now. Mother and baby are both healthy." Flynn entered the bedroom to find Annabelle sitting up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said. Flynn approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving one miniature fist in the air. As Flynn watched, the baby's eyes opened, revealing a color that might become hazel like his own. "He is perfect," Flynn whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you for this." They named him Samuel after Flynn's father, with the middle name Thomas after Annabelle's father. Samuel Thomas Lawrence, born into a family that loved him before he took his first breath. The first year of Samuel's life was a blur of sleepless nights and constant wonder. Annabelle and Flynn took turns walking him when he cried, changing his diapers, marveling over every new expression and gesture. The orchard grew around them, the young trees putting down roots and reaching toward the sky. The farm prospered with the steady supply of water from the well, and Flynn expanded their vegetable garden and brought home chickens and a milk cow. By the time Samuel was 2 years old and toddling around the farmyard, the orchard trees were beginning to show signs of their future promise. A few of them even produced their first tiny apples, which Flynn harvested with ceremony and made into a special pie for Annabelle. "The first fruits of our orchard," he said, setting the pie on the table. "It might be small now, but in a few more years, we are going to have more apples than we know what to do with. Then we will sell them," Annabelle said practically. "There is a market for good apples in Rock Springs and beyond. We could even expand into other fruits. Pears do well in this climate, and cherries." Flynn grinned. "You have been thinking about this." "I have," Annabelle admitted. "I want this orchard to be everything my father dreamed it could be. I want Samuel to grow up in a place of abundance, not scarcity." 2 years later, they had a second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose after both their mothers. Margaret was a sunny-tempered baby who rarely cried, the opposite of her brother's colicky infancy. Samuel, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his little sister and wanted to help with everything. By 1889, the orchard was in full production. The trees that Flynn and Annabelle had planted that first spring were now bearing substantial crops of apples, and they had continued to expand the orchard each year, adding new varieties and new trees. They hired seasonal workers to help with the harvest, and Flynn designed a storage system that would keep the apples fresh through most of the winter. They sold their apples in Rock Springs and to merchants who would ship them east on the railroad. The profits allowed them to improve the farm even more. A new barn, modern equipment, an expanded house with a proper second story. They kept Annabelle's mother's apple tree, of course, giving it pride of place at the center of the orchard. It was thriving now, producing sweet fruit every year, a testament to the power of refusing to give up. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Annabelle and Flynn would sit on their porch and look out at the orchard, row after row of healthy trees marching down the slope. The farm that had been dying when Flynn first arrived was now the most prosperous in the county, known throughout Wyoming for the quality of its fruit. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Annabelle asked one such evening, her hand in Flynn's. "When you stopped and asked about work?" "I think about it all the time," Flynn said. "I think about how close I came to just riding past. I almost did, you know. I was tired and hungry, and I figured another dying farm was not my problem. But then I saw you under that tree and something made me stop." "Fate," Annabelle said. "Love," Flynn corrected. "Even then, before I knew you, I think some part of me recognized that you were what I had been searching for. Not just a place to stay, but a reason to stay. A reason to stop drifting and start living. I was so scared when you first arrived, Annabelle confessed. I wanted to trust you, but I had been alone for so long, I had forgotten how to let anyone in. But you did let me in. You took a chance on me. Best decision I ever made, Annabelle said, squeezing his hand. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the farm. Chickens settling in for the night, the cow lowing softly in the barn, the rustle of leaves in the orchard. We should plant more trees next spring, Flynn said. There is room on the east section, and I have been thinking about trying some pear varieties. More trees means we will need to hire on more help permanently, Annabelle said. We cannot keep doing all this work ourselves, especially with the children to care for. You are right. I will ask around in town, see if there are any young men looking for steady work and a chance to learn the orchard business. Or women, Annabelle added. Plenty of women need work, and many of them are better with plants than men give them credit for. Flynn smiled. Or women, he agreed. You are the proof of that. In the spring of 1890, they hired 2 young workers, a man named Jacob who had worked on failing cattle ranches and was ready to try something different, and a woman named Clara who had grown up on a farm but lost her land to the bank. Both were in their early 20s, hard workers, grateful for the opportunity. Flynn taught them everything he knew about apple trees and orchard management. He was a patient teacher, generous with his knowledge, and both Jacob and Clara thrived under his instruction. Within a year, the orchard had expanded by another 40 trees, and the harvests were so abundant they had to build a second storage building. Annabelle had another child in 1891, another boy they named Daniel. With 3 children and a thriving business, the farmhouse was constantly full of noise and activity. Samuel was 8 now, old enough to help with small tasks in the orchard. Margaret was 6 and spent her days following her mother around, learning to cook and tend the garden. Baby Daniel was just learning to walk, stumbling around the yard under the watchful eyes of his siblings. Flynn sometimes looked around at the life they had built and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. From that first day, when he had stopped to help a stranger pick apples from a dying tree, to this moment, with 3 children, a thriving orchard, and a love that grew deeper every year, it was more than he had ever dreamed possible. The years rolled by, marked by harvests and planting seasons, by birthdays and holidays, by the slow, steady growth of both children and trees. The orchard became famous throughout Wyoming and beyond, with merchants clamoring for their apples. Flynn and Annabelle's brand, a simple design of a tree with deep roots that Annabelle had sketched one evening, became synonymous with quality. Samuel grew into a serious young man who loved the orchard as much as his father did, learning every aspect of the business. Margaret became skilled at the financial side of things, keeping meticulous records and negotiating with merchants. Daniel, the baby, turned out to have a gift for grafting and plant breeding, constantly experimenting with new varieties. In 1900, Flynn and Annabelle's 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. By then, Samuel was 21 and courting a nice girl from town. Margaret was 19 and had just started teaching at the Rock Springs School. Daniel was 14 and already showing signs of becoming taller than his father. The party was held in the orchard, under the branches of Annabelle's mother's tree, which was now enormous and heavy with fruit. Friends and workers and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate. There was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned under the weight of it, much of it made from the orchard's bounty. Apple pies and apple cider, apple butter and apple sauce, fresh apples of a dozen varieties. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Flynn pulled Annabelle away from the crowd for a private moment. They walked to the edge of the orchard, looking out over the rows of trees that stretched into the gathering darkness. 20 years, Annabelle said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. I would do it all again, Flynn said. Every single day, every choice that led me to you, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made the good parts sweeter. Annabelle leaned her head on his shoulder. She was 44 now, and Flynn was 47, both of them marked by the years of hard work and outdoor living. But when Annabelle looked at Flynn, she still saw the young man who had stopped to help her on that desperate autumn day in 1883, the man who had promised to find water and had kept his promise, the man who had loved her through every season of their lives together. "Do you remember what you said that first week?" she asked. "You said dreams do not have to die, they just need someone to believe in them again." "I remember. You made me believe," Annabelle said, "not just in the orchard or the farm, but in myself, in the future, in love. You gave me back hope when I thought it was gone forever." Flynn turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "And you gave me a home," he said. "You took a drifter with nothing to his name and gave him a purpose, a family, a legacy. Everything good in my life came from the moment I stopped to help you pick apples from a dying tree." They kissed, a soft, lingering kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. Behind them, the party continued, their children and friends celebrating, but for that moment, it was just the two of them under the Wyoming stars, in the orchard they had planted together. 5 years later, Samuel married his sweetheart and brought her to live at the farm. Flynn and Annabelle built them a small house on the eastern edge of the property, and Samuel took over more and more of the daily operations of the orchard. Flynn was happy to step back, proud of the man his son had become and confident that the business was in good hands. Margaret married a banker from Rock Springs and moved to town, but she kept the orchard's books and visited every week, bringing her own children to play under the trees their grandparents had planted. Daniel stayed on the farm, taking over the experimental side of the business, developing new varieties of apples that were even more suited to Wyoming's climate and even more delicious. In 1910, Flynn's health began to decline. He had worked hard all his life and his body was wearing out. He developed a cough that would not go away, and by winter it was clear that he was seriously ill. The doctor said it was his lungs, damaged by years of dust and hard labor. Annabelle nursed him through that winter with fierce devotion, refusing to let him give up. But even her stubborn love could not hold back the inevitable. On a cold March morning, with Annabelle holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, Flynn Lawrence took his last breath. Annabelle felt like her heart had been torn from her chest. They had had 30 years together, built a life and a family and a legacy, but it was not enough. It would never have been enough. She wanted 30 more years, 60 more forever. They buried him under Annabelle's mother's apple tree, the tree that had brought them together, the tree that Flynn had saved. Samuel carved a headstone from local granite, engraving it simply, "Flynn Lawrence, beloved husband and father who planted orchards and grew love." For months, Annabelle moved through her days in a fog of grief. She went through the motions of living, caring for the orchard and her family, but the joy had gone out of everything. Her children worried about her, but she insisted she was fine, that she just needed time. It was on a September afternoon, almost exactly 30 years after the day she had first met Flynn, that Annabelle went out to the apple tree to pick fruit. She had not done it since Flynn died, but something drew her there that day. She stood under the branches, looking up at the apples hanging heavy and ripe, and remembered another September when this tree had been dying, and she had been alone and desperate. Then she looked around at the orchard, hundreds of trees that had not existed before Flynn came into her life. All of them descended from the knowledge and skill he had shared. She looked at the farmhouse, expanded and improved, full of children and grandchildren. She looked at the storage buildings and the barn and the well that had saved everything. Flynn was gone, but his legacy lived on in every tree, every apple, every person whose life he had touched. He had taken a dying farm and a grieving woman and created abundance from scarcity, hope from despair, life from death. And he had done it all because of love, because he believed in dreams and refused to give up on them. Annabelle reached up and picked an apple from the tree, one of the perfect red fruits that Flynn had taught this tree to produce again. She bit into it, tasting the sweet, crisp flesh, and felt Flynn's presence so strongly it was as if he was standing beside her. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, to the tree, to the memory of the man she loved. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for planting this orchard." The wind rustled through the leaves of the apple tree, and Annabelle chose to hear it as Flynn's answer. "You are welcome, my love. You are welcome." Annabelle lived another 15 years, long enough to see the orchard expand to over 500 trees, long enough to hold her great-grandchildren and tell them stories about their great-grandfather, the cowboy who had planted an orchard for love. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still walking the orchard rows every morning, still tending to the mother tree that had started it all. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1925 at the age of 70, her children buried her next to Flynn, under the spreading branches of that first apple tree. The tree that had almost died, the tree that had brought two lonely people together. The tree that had witnessed the planting of an orchard and the growing of a love that would outlast both their lives. Samuel and his children and grandchildren continued to run the orchard, passing down Flynn's techniques and Annabelle's stubborn determination from generation to generation. The orchard grew and prospered through the decades, through depressions and wars and changing times, always producing the finest apples in Wyoming, always bearing the brand of a tree with deep roots. And every September, the descendants of Flynn and Annabelle would gather under that first apple tree, the one that had started everything, and they would pick its fruit and remember the story. How a woman was picking apples from a dying tree, and a cowboy planted an orchard for her. And from that simple act of love and faith grew something that would nourish generations to come. The orchard stood as testament to the power of refusing to give up, of believing in tomorrow even when today looked hopeless, of love that plants seeds for a future it might never see. It stood as reminder that sometimes the greatest legacies begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and that one person who stops to help another can change not just two lives but countless lives stretching forward through time. In the archives of the Wyoming Historical Society, there is a photograph from 1920 showing Flynn and Annabelle in their later years, standing together in front of their orchard. Flynn's arm is around Annabelle's shoulders, and they are both smiling, faces creased with age and sun and laughter. Behind them, rows of apple trees stretch toward the horizon, heavy with fruit, and at the center of the photograph stands Annabelle's mother's tree, massive and magnificent, its branches spread wide like a blessing. The photograph is labeled, Flynn and Annabelle Lawrence, Rock Springs, Wyoming, 1920, founders of Lawrence Orchards. But those who know the story see more than just two old people and some trees. They see a love story written in wood and earth and fruit, a testament to what can grow when two people refuse to let hope die, when they choose to plant seeds even in the hardest ground, when they believe that tomorrow can be better than today. They see the cowboy who stopped to help a stranger and stayed to build a life. They see the woman who took a chance on a drifter and gained a partner for life. They see an orchard that began with a single dying tree and grew into a legacy that would feed and sustain generations. They see, most of all, love. Simple, stubborn, enduring love that refused to give up, that found water in dry ground and made the desert bloom, that took nothing and created everything. The kind of love that plants orchards, that builds futures, that changes the world one tree, one day, one kindness at a time. And somewhere in Wyoming, there is still an apple tree, ancient now but still producing fruit every September, its branches spreading wide over 2 graves marked with weathered granite stones. The tree stands guardian over Flynn and Annabelle Lawrence, cowboy and farmer, husband and wife, who proved that the greatest adventures often begin with the simplest question: can I help? Their descendants still tend the orchard, still harvest the apples, still tell the story to anyone who will listen. Because it is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. It is a story about hope and love and the courage to believe in tomorrow. It is a story about how one dying tree became a forest, how one moment of kindness became a lifetime of love, how 2 lonely people found each other and built something that would outlast them both. It is the story of how she was picking apples from a dying tree, and the cowboy planted an orchard for her, and how that simple act of love changed everything.